Of the Intelligence Committee, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you. From Washington, I am Al Hunt.
And I'm Robert Novak. More of CNN's live coverage of America's new war continues next.
I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington.
And I'm Joey Chen at CNN Center in Atlanta. To our viewers, we want to bring you up to date on the latest developments in America's new war, the fight against terrorism. President Bush has declared the United States at war and called on the country's fighting men and women to get ready. Today, he huddled with his top security advisors at Camp David. Meeting with President Bush at this hour are the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and other top military advisors. The focus for them is to define the enemy and to offer a response. The president warning that this is a different kind of enemy, fighting on a battlefield without boundaries. In New York and in Washington today, massive rescue operations continue at the World Trade Center. 152 bodies recovered, and the list of the missing grows to more than 4,900 people. On Wall Street, officials from the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ say that all systems are go, that the U.S. markets will be able to open as planned Monday at 9:30 in the morning Eastern. Those markets have been closed now for 4 days, which is the longest time since World War I. Earlier in the day, officials tested the databases and communication lines of the exchanges and concluded that the market is ready for business. Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill is planning to attend Monday's opening bell.
President Bush, meanwhile, is steeling the nation for an assault on terrorism that he vows will go on, quote, as long as it takes. CNN's White House correspondent Kelly Wallace is near Camp David, joins us now with more. Kelly, tell us what's going on.
Well, Wolf, President Bush sending out a number of messages as he and his aides go over military options. He's telling a public anxious for some sort of retaliation to be patient. At the same time, he is preparing the American people for a military campaign against terrorists and those who harbor them that could last months, if not years, and could involve using ground troops.
Spending the weekend at the secluded presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains, President Bush huddles with his national security team and prepares the American people for war.
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly.
The president refuses to discuss military options, but for the first time, he specifically names suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden as a, quote, prime suspect behind Tuesday's terrorism spree. Bin Laden is believed to be hiding out in Afghanistan, with the ruling Taliban government providing him safe haven.
This act will not stand. We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running. And we'll bring him to justice.
When asked if those words mean President Bush is considering using ground troops to attack terrorists, aides say nothing has been ruled out. But winning this so-called war and finding the elusive bin Laden won't be easy, says a former Clinton administration official.
We're not fighting a military, we're not fighting an organized power, but we're fighting a very diffuse and shadowy organization that has links in many different parts of the world.
Knowing Americans are hungry for swift retaliation, the president uses his radio address to say a sweeping response will come in time.
You will be asked for your patience, for the conflict will not be short. You will be asked for resolve, for the conflict will not be easy. You will be asked for your strength, because the course to victory may be long.
And aides say President Bush has gained strength from his meeting Friday with more than 200 family members with loved ones still missing, believing his job is to turn their sorrow into something positive for future generations.
And while the American people overwhelmingly support some form of military retaliation, keeping that support up could become a bigger and bigger challenge for the president over time, especially if any lengthy campaign involves the loss of additional American lives. Wolf?
Kelly, tell our viewers why the White House regards Pakistan and Pakistan's cooperation as so important to this new war on terrorism.
Well, Wolf, of course, Pakistan neighbors Afghanistan and is one of only 3 countries recognizing the ruling Taliban government as the government of Afghanistan. And, of course, we know the Taliban providing safe haven to Osama bin Laden. We do know, according to a Pakistani official, that President Bush called Pakistani President Musharraf this morning to thank him for his support. The White House had no comment on the call, but Secretary of State Colin Powell confirming today what CNN had been reporting since yesterday, that the Pakistanis have agreed to fully cooperate with the U.S. in the fight against terrorism. Secretary Powell saying that the Pakistanis have agreed to all of the requests made by the United States, and sources saying one of those requests include allowing U.S. warplanes access to Pakistani airspace if the U.S. decides to attack, and obviously very crucial for U.S. warplanes to fly into that airspace if there is any attack on Afghanistan. Wolf, back to you.
And Kelly, while I have you, we saw Vice President Dick Cheney sitting alongside the president at that meeting at Camp David. Earlier in the week, they had separated supposedly out of security concerns. They didn't want the president and the vice president at the same location. Are those security concerns gone now, or is Camp David unique?
Well, security concerns are still there, Wolf. You know, the U.S. still operating on a high state of alert. As you noted, Vice President Cheney spending a few days at Camp David because the U.S. Secret Service deciding, based on ongoing security concerns, that it would be best not to have the president and the vice president in the same location. But they both are at Camp David. It is obviously a very secure location, but I do believe that the U.S. still very concerned about the security threat out there and still operating on a high state of alert. Wolf?
Kelly Wallace near Camp David up in Thurmont, Maryland. Thank you very much. And we do have some news that our Justice Department producer Terry Friedman is informing us about. I want to be very precise. The Justice Department has just issued a second warrant, a second arrest warrant in connection with what is described as another material witness in this continuing investigation. We do not yet know the names or other details. Of course, we'll be providing those details to you as they become available. Once again, a second arrest warrant for a material witness just issued by the Justice Department. Meanwhile, even as the nation's military prepares for the next stage, rescue workers continue the grim task of recovering the bodies of the 189 victims of the Pentagon attack. CNN's military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre once again joins us now live. Jamie, give us the headlines.
Well, Wolf, the recovery effort here continues, and then the move will begin to shore up the building and strip away so it can be rebuilt. Just a short time ago, though, the Pentagon released some of its video that was shot by an Air Force cameraman of the initial aftermath of the plane hitting the side of the building. This video shot by Tech Sergeant Robert Stenberg, who grabbed his camera and got out in time to capture the side of the Pentagon actually collapsing. This happened about 45 minutes or so after the plane hit the building. Today, Pentagon, the project director for renovation, said that because of the reinforcement that had been put into this recently renovated part of the Pentagon, it held long enough for people to get out of that section of the building who weren't actually killed by the impact. It didn't collapse right away. It held long enough for people to get out, so they say that that was one of the improvements that had been put into the Pentagon as part of the renovation that paid off. Other improvements included special blast-proof glass that did not shatter, even the windows right near the impact area, sprinklers that kept the fire from spreading in one direction, and also special fire retardant walls as well. Wolf?
I don't know if you can answer this question, Jamie, but I'll ask you anyhow. How do officials in the building that you cover, the Pentagon, feel about eventually reopening Reagan National Airport, which of course is so close to the Pentagon?
Well, you know, I've only talked informally to people about this. I think the general feeling is that if the airport were to remain closed forever, that it would be handing the terrorists a victory, that it's important for the United States to go back to operate more normally, just as it's important to rebuild the Pentagon. Of course, the Pentagon is on a flight path right over National Airport, Reagan National Airport. The Secretary of Defense says he has got planes going over his office every 5 or 10 minutes, depending on the landing pattern. So it's very difficult to protect this building against a plane impact. But remember, the plane that crashed into this building did not take off from Reagan National Airport. It took off from Dulles, about 20 miles from here.
Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon, once again, thank you very much. Back to you, Joey.
Wolf, the view now from a place so many of us know so very little about, but in Afghanistan right now, there's a clear sense of fear. The possibility of a U.S. attack because Afghanistan plays host to prime suspect Osama bin Laden. CNN's Nick Robertson reports now via videophone from Kabul.
Well, the latest information we have is that the Iranian government has ordered its border with Afghanistan sealed in the case of the aftermath of an American attack on Afghanistan, that refugees try and flood across the border. Iran says it has 2 million Afghan refugees already and can't take any more. Now, this comes hard on the heels of the Pakistani government giving the go-ahead to United States support. That has implications in Afghanistan as well, because it could mean the border with Pakistan and Afghanistan is sealed. That would mean in the capital here, Kabul, and other cities around the country, shortages of food. Most food coming to Afghanistan comes from Pakistan and Iran. So the outlook for the people here in Kabul and the other cities, fairly bleak. Already we know that there's been a little panic buying, people trying to buy up supplies in case of attack. Food prices have gone up 10 to 15%, and those with a little bit more money have been trying to get out of the city to see relatives in the country, or if they can, flee across those borders, particularly to Pakistan, before the borders close. The Taliban today did try to put pressure on Pakistan not to sign up to help America. They threatened that if any neighbor, particularly an Islamic one, was to help America by giving it soil or airspace to America, then they would consider them an enemy as well in case of attack, and then they might invade that country as well. So that a clear statement, a clear threat towards Pakistan. A Council of Elders today also told the Taliban here in Afghanistan that they shouldn't close the door to diplomacy, but they did say, and they made it very clear, that if Afghanistan was attacked, then the Council of Elders, which represents many of the tribes here in Afghanistan, would throw their complete support behind the Taliban. Nick Robertson, CNN, Kabul, Afghanistan.
So if the president does order an attack, the question here, how does the United States build and keep the support of key players, and what role would other nations play? CNN military affairs consultant General Wesley Clark is joining us here in the studio. General, if you could explain to us, you know, a lot of us think of you military men as making simply military decisions and not being too concerned about the diplomatic side, but really it must be hand in hand.
Well, in any military operation, the diplomacy actually has to go first, because you have to gain access for the military forces. But in this case, it's even more intricate, because the primary weapon will be information and police actions, and the military will only come later, or if there's a particular requirement for the military. So the lead has to be held by the diplomats in this.
Talk to us about the
look at it on the map.
locations of things. Right, General.
So, I mean, this is the area that everyone's concerned about, the country of Afghanistan. Surrounded by Pakistan on the south and east, Iran on the west, former states of the Soviet Union on the north, and somewhere in here, we believe, is Osama bin Laden. The Taliban movement has said that it will basically support him. It will not cooperate with the United States in turning him in. But the Taliban movement has been supported by and has relations with the government of Pakistan. The government of Pakistan has, and its president, have pledged full support and cooperation to the United States. Presumably, this government will help cut off support to the Taliban and Osama bin Laden.
So when we say the United States would like full support from Pakistan, what is it that the United States would need from Pakistan?
Well, let's speak hypothetically, because Secretary Powell has said he's going to keep that private, exactly what's been asked. But, for example, the things that you might ask are, first, cut off all supplies to the terrorists. Isolate and contain...
Because Afghanistan needs both food and fuel through Pakistan.
That's exactly right. And communications, and money, and weapons, and explosives, and many other things. So, want to cut this supply line. Then, if there are terrorist groups inside Pakistan, they need to be detained. And then if we have information about the locations of the terrorist groups inside Afghanistan, Pakistan needs to provide that information to the United States. And the list goes on and on and on about what specific information could be provided, what specific assistance could be given. And those will be matters of the closest, most detailed consultation between the United States and Pakistan. But the ideal solution to this crisis is and remains that the Taliban itself has a change of heart. and recognizes that what Osama bin Laden has done is not representative of Islam at all, but the opposite, and turns him over to justice.
So if Islamic leaders then would join, not only in Afghanistan but throughout the region, if Islamic leaders would join in putting the pressure on to say, look, it is time to turn him over,
that's exactly right.
That would
That's
be
exactly
the better
right.
resolution
That's
from your point of view.
That is the correct resolution. This is a problem for the world community. It's just that it happened on U.S. soil, but these people represent a threat to the entire world.
You talk about the involvement of the world community. Of course, there has been support, certainly from our allies in Europe, throughout the world. Even President Putin has spoken very positively of the need for support. But these nations, in order to offer support, I mean, first of all, what kind of support would they be able to give? And in return, wouldn't they be anticipating some quid pro quo?
Well, there's no question that in most of the Arab nations, the moderate Arab nations in the Middle East and North Africa, there are cells that are associated with the terrorists that have been trained by Osama bin Laden or in some way connected. And many of these governments are also under some degree of threat from these Islamic extremists. And so when they take actions to support us, they do put themselves in some degree of jeopardy. So we know we're asking a lot, but on the other hand, they're the ones who can best take this action. And that's why it is absolutely a coalition, an allied operation. It's an allied diplomatic, political operation, police operation, intelligence operation, before it ever becomes a military operation.
And then in the nature, we were speaking a moment ago about President Putin and European leaders, for example, who might in some way be able to assist the United States in whatever operation it chooses. In return, what might President Putin, other leaders, European leaders, want from the United States?
Well, I think that as we've started this operation, it's directed very narrowly at the people who did this terrible set of deeds on the 11th of September. But as we begin to unravel the network, we'll find it's connected to many of the other terrorist networks in the world. And so I think it's inevitable there'll be some degree of pressure to enlarge the scope of the operation. If they're cooperating with us to go after terrorists that did this to the United States, what about the terrorists who have been active or believed to be active against their own countries? And that's taking place in many countries around the world. So nations are not only acting out of concern for us, but they're also joining with us in their own self-interest.
In terms of the hardware considerations on the military front, can you talk to us about what the expectations would be and the timeline for any movements if a decision were to be made?
Well, I think there's a broad range of options, and I think they're self-evident almost. You've got cruise missiles, which we've used before against the terrorist training camps in Afghanistan. We can use a variety of...
Not particularly too effective.
Not too effective. Well, they struck the target, but as in any case, when you're trying to hit a specific group of people, you have no assurance that they'll be there when the missiles arrive on target. We saw the very effective use of long-range bombers with precision-guided weapons in the Kosovo Air Campaign Operation Allied Force a couple of years ago. So we have that option. We have aviation that can be positioned in the region, either in bases and refueled en route, or maybe naval aviation. We could get land forces in there, although land forces take time. The larger the force, the longer it takes to get there, and the more complicated the logistics build up. A decade ago, we did Operation in the Persian Gulf, Operation Desert Storm, and it took 5-6 months to build up that ground force, get it ready, staged on the ground, and moved. Since then, we've improved our response time in the Persian Gulf, but this is a new theater of concern, and we'd have to look at this very carefully, so we might be weeks, months away from taking action. As the President said, it's going to require sustained dedication, resolve on the part of the American people and the world community to go after this threat.
Former Supreme Allied Commander for NATO, General Wesley Clark, now military consultant to CNN. We appreciate your insight. Wolf?
Thank you, Joey. And powerful words are being used today. Talk of war, international cooperation, calling up the military reserves. Someone who knows about using those words is the former Secretary of State, Lawrence Eagleburger, and he joins us now. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much. You were a key State Department official during the Gulf War some 10 years ago. Tell our viewers what is going to be the major difference between this anticipated upcoming war and the war that all of us remember, the Gulf War.
The differences are significant, Wolf. The first of which is we clearly knew who our enemy was in the Iraq situation. What I think everyone needs to understand, and General Clark certainly talked about this, is that this time around we have a lot of enemies. We know some of them. We will find out more of them. They have an interlocking network. There's no question about that. And it's going to be much tougher to get at them. And it's going to be therefore a much more complicated and long-term effort. The Iraq War was over in 6 weeks, whatever it was. That will not be the case this time. This is going to take some years to accomplish, and you have to hope and pray that the President can lead us all for that period of time and keep the support up.
If the President concludes that Osama bin Laden was in fact responsible and he continues to receive protection from the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, does that necessarily mean the U.S. should engage in a land invasion of Afghanistan?
I think that would be, under most circumstances, the last thing we would want to do. Putting land forces into some place like Afghanistan, in the first place, we saw how successful the Soviet Union was. If you get all of the Afghanis opposed to you, it can be a very unpleasant circumstance. I would think that with our technology, if we know where he is, and that's the first question, I should think we could get at him and at the Taliban without having to put troops on the ground.
But you well know there are so many places to hide in Afghanistan, caves, all sorts of locations within the mountainous terrain there. It would be almost impossible without putting people on the ground to find him. A lot of experts say that.
Well, they can say that if they want, and I don't claim to be an expert. On the other hand, well, if you how many people are you going to put on the ground in Afghanistan to try to find him? It would seem to me thousands, and you'd be running around in an area we know very little about. I'm not saying that in the end we might not have to do something like that, but I think there are all sorts of alternatives that have to be examined first. And by the way, let's make it very clear that while Osama bin Laden is the immediate source of our agony, he is by no means the only problem we face, and if we got him tomorrow morning, he has a whole host of lieutenants and an organization that would carry on. So let's not get mesmerized by Osama bin Laden, despite the fact we have to get him at some point. That doesn't mean we necessarily have to start there. It does mean we have to recognize we have a web of terrorist organizations, all of whom mean us evil, and we're going to have to deal with all of that. It may take some time to organize our intelligence enough to know exactly what we're dealing with here. But if we think that this has to begin with an attack on Osama bin Laden, I think we are making a mistake. That isn't to say he shouldn't be public enemy number one, at least for the moment. But it is to say that this is a much more complicated effort than simply getting him. And to put troops into Afghanistan to accomplish this effort of getting bin Laden may be a real mistake.
What else can the United States do with its allies against other states that may be cooperating with terrorists, maybe providing support, financial support, or providing them what is called harbor? What else can the United States do against these states that the U.S. is already not doing?
Well, I think there's a lot there. Again, Wolf, it depends on the particular country. First of all,
let me give you one example. Yeah. For example, Iraq. What else could the U.S. be doing as far as Iraq is concerned?
Oh, I think that's the easiest one for me, because in that case, we could certainly escalate. We'd have to get the troops into the area and so forth, but we could certainly escalate what we have been doing to them when they misbehave as it is. And in fact, I think we've gone far too long without, in fact, cracking him across the jowls because of things he has done. Iraq is almost the easiest one, for me at least, to contemplate, because there you almost immediately go into the use of military force. The rest of the countries involved are much more complicated, if you will. First of all, the question has to be which country, how vulnerable is it to attack? But more importantly than that, what are the other sources of pressure that we may have available to us? And one of the things with regard to all of these terrorist organizations and the countries involved is we have to start by following the money. Where is the money coming from? Where is it going? Where is it hidden? Is it in Swiss banks and so forth? The other thing I would say to you, and a lot of people are going to object to this, but I think we need to get into intimate discussions with the Israelis on a whole host of these questions. We talk with them a lot now, but I really think they can offer us some real advice on intelligence matters that would be where we would be more intimately involved. They have a lot of experience in this whole area. I know there has been a reaction on the part of some Americans who say, well, we've been too close to the Israelis and that's what's caused all of this. I think that's nonsense. But I do think the Israelis, in getting together with us and talking about this experience and how to deal with it, we might learn some very valuable things from them.
Well, since you raised the issue of the Israelis, during the Gulf War, correct me if I'm wrong, you and Paul Wolfowitz, who's now the Deputy Defense Secretary, went to Israel to restrain the Israelis to prevent them from responding militarily to those Scud missiles being launched by the Iraqis. Looking back on that, was that a mistake?
No. In the first place, Wolf, it's one of the areas where, one of the few areas where I can claim some diplomatic success in my lifetime. Now, don't knock it. But the basic point here is that the effort in the Iraq case was to form a coalition of governments, particularly including a number of governments in the area, Middle Eastern governments, to deal with Iraq. And we did that. And if the Israelis had become a direct part of this, it would have made it much more difficult to build that coalition. Secondly, and I think equally important, and now I think Israelis would accept the fact, many would at least, by asking them to stay on the sidelines, we did a job for them that cost them nothing in the way of the lives of the Israeli military. So no, I don't think it was a mistake then at all. I do think this is a different situation.
Mr. Secretary, what about the existing U.S. policy barring assassinations? Is it time to rethink that policy?
I have argued for some years, to show you how awfully bloodthirsty I am, I have argued for some years that executive order issued during President Ford's term should have been terminated long before this, and certainly should be now.
Lawrence Eagleburger speaking bluntly, as he always does. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Joey?
Wolf, we want to give our viewers now the latest on the investigation into the attacks. There has been a second arrest warrant issued, and CNN has learned that U.S. intelligence already apparently had an eye on at least two of the suspected hijackers even before Tuesday's assault. CNN national correspondent Mike Betcher has been following up all elements of the investigation. Mike, what can you tell us?
Well, the second warrant, Joey, was issued in New York. It was issued for material witness, but that person is not yet in custody. There is only one other material witness so far in this case, and this was a man pulled off of a jet Thursday at Kennedy Airport. He was found to have fake pilot's ID. Now, Justice Department spokesman Mindy Tucker is saying we're at a point now where there will be more frequent and additional warrants. Now, as well, the Immigration and Naturalization Service is holding 25 people, and the Justice Department, the FBI, has been speaking to them as well, especially two men they're very interested in, Ayub Al-Khan and Mohammed Jawed Azmath. Now, these two men were on a flight Tuesday from Newark to San Antonio when it was diverted to St. Louis. That was the morning of the hijacking. They were picked up in Fort Worth, Texas on Wednesday on a train. They were found to have box cutters. Those are the similar type items that investigators believe the hijackers used in some instances to get control of these airplanes. And we have one other late-breaking item, and it was reported by CNN correspondent Eileen O'Connor. Two of the hijackers on the American Airlines flight that slammed into the Pentagon had been under surveillance by U.S. intelligence for a few weeks before the terrorist attacks in the United States. Khalid Al-Midar was caught on surveillance. He's one of these men. He was caught on surveillance tape in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, meeting with a suspect in the bombing of the USS Cole. So this provides a link between the Cole bombing and as well the bombings the terrorist attacks here in the United States. And the FBI is also looking for al-Mihdhar, pardon me, the FBI was looking for al-Mihdhar and Salem al-Amzi prior to Tuesday's attacks. Salem al-Amzi was an associate of Mihdhar, so these two people, Joey, were being sought, and they didn't get to them in time.
Right, so this apparently draws a link between Tuesday's attacks and the Cole. Are investigators then also looking into other things, say the previous World Trade Center bombing or the embassy bombings, and trying to see if any other figures there might be linked to anything that was planned for Tuesday or might be planned for the days to come?
Well, they started that in day one. We reported that on the first day. They were going back looking for clues, because if you're starting with the premise that Osama bin Laden is the #1 suspect, then you're going to have to look at the past cases and connect them to this one. And certainly the top lieutenants in all of those cases are the same people, because it's a tight-knit group. He doesn't deal with a lot of people. He's got a couple of top lieutenants, and its information is held closely. So if they can tie all of these together, it will really bolster all the cases. They can find out who bombed the USS Cole, perhaps, and solve this at the same time. It's going to be very difficult, though.
Do they, in understanding the web of Osama bin Laden, do they have any fix on the possibility of numbers, of how many people that are either tightly or loosely affiliated with his organization might be in the United States?
How many people might be in the United States?
Either tightly or loosely.
No, for a few years I've been trying to get some figures on that, and we're talking about sleeper cells here, and these are people brought into the country by the Al-Qaeda organization, told to go to the United States, and they are here for years, and precisely because they're sleeper cells, they're like anybody else. You can't tell them apart from any normal citizen. It's very hard to get a count. We're working on that, though. I'm looking to get an answer on that, and I hope to have one here very shortly.
And people who might have been in this country for years. In other words, we think perhaps a terror operation would, say, come in and plan 6 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. These operations might have been planned or outlooked or organized over months and years?
Look, we reported yesterday that the seeds for this may have been planted at an Islamic conference in Khartoum in the Sudan back in 1994 when a lot of the world's terrorists got together after the regular day business at this meeting. And we know that federal authorities, intelligence officials are looking at perhaps the seed for everything we're seeing right now, from Khobar Towers, that bombing, to the USS Cole, to this present horrific terrorist attack in the United States. The seeds may have been planted there. So you're looking 6-7 years before in a big concept, big picture. In terms of a USS Cole attack, could be 2 years, 3 years. These things are planned well in advance, and some of the people are put in years in advance.
CNN's national correspondent Mike Boettcher following up on all aspects of the investigation. Thanks very much, Mike. Wolf?
Thank you, Joey. And as investigators work to put together the pieces of the puzzle surrounding Tuesday's violence, they're finding a number of links between the suspected hijackers. CNN's Brent Sadler has more on the background of one man believed to have died when a plane he helped hijack crashed into a Pennsylvania field.
A possible White House suicide pilot or the face of an innocent passenger, 26-year-old Ziad Jarrah from Lebanon. The United States Justice Department says he was one of the hijackers on United Flight 93, which crashed in a field some 80 miles from Pittsburgh shortly after 3 other jets struck the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Flight 93, whose passengers might have wrestled the hijackers, causing the plane to crash, could have been targeting the very heart of America and President Bush himself. In Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, though, Ziad Jarrah's family insists there's no hard evidence to prove any of that.
He never acted or talked in a way that you could have an understanding that he might be related to this.
In Germany, investigators now say the Technical University in Hamburg, with its now closed prayer room, is where Jarrah and 2 other alleged hijackers studied. Mohammed Atta, whom US authorities believe was aboard the first plane to hit the World Trade Center, and Marwan al-Shihi, flying in the second aircraft to hit the Twin Towers. Ziad Jarrah's family are Sunni Muslims, well-educated and well-to-do. They spoke of a young man whose personality, they claim, does not fit the profile of an Islamic fundamentalist bent on terror.
He has his girlfriend, he goes to nightclubs, he drinks sometimes. His way of life can't be related to these parts.
Ziad Jarrah's way of life away from home started in Germany. He began to study engineering 4 years ago on courses paid for by proud parents. Around a year ago, he told them he was in the United States, taking part in a Boeing Aircraft Corporation seminar related to his studies. After that, he returned to Hamburg, receiving more help from his parents to study. When he later told them he was in Florida, training as a pilot, they assumed all was well. His last call home came 2 days before the suicide attacks, when he thanked his ailing father for sending more money. His apartment manager says he paid cash weekly for 1-bedroom accommodation and presented a German passport with a student visa. On May 2nd this year, he obtained a Florida driver's license. The same day, another terrorist suspect, Mohammed Atta, got his Florida driver's license. The only time he raised concern, they say, is when his Turkish girlfriend told them she thought he might have gone with friends to Afghanistan while they were separated for several weeks. The family says there's no proof of any trip to Afghanistan and are willing to cooperate with the international inquiry.
What happened is a tragedy, a catastrophe for all people, and we don't agree on these acts, and we are surprised and shocked of what happened.
The Lebanese authorities are stressing that neither the government nor its people at large have any link with the terror attacks against America, regardless of suspicions focused on one of its citizens. Standing ready, say officials here, to cooperate with investigations in any way they can. Brent Sadler, CNN, Beirut.
And joining us from New York now is our senior analyst, Jeff Greenfield. Jeff, I know you've been thinking about the consensus that seems to be developing in the United States right now, but inevitably there are going to be some serious differences. How will that affect this entire operation?
I think it's really important, Wolf, to understand that when, as it's inevitable, disagreements may be heard, it is not a sign of weakness. In fact, we may consider it a sign of strength. I mean, you go back to the Civil War, and within the North, Lincoln was severely criticized for the conduct of the war. He thought, until the tide of the war turned, he might even have been turned out of office for a second term. We think of World War II as the time of great unity, and yet in 1941, relatively just a couple of months or weeks before Pearl Harbor, a vote to extend the draft passed the House by one single vote. And even during the war, people in the Congress often were critical of Roosevelt for his conduct of the war. They raised objections to executive incursions on congressional authority. And think back again, Wolf, you covered this. When the Gulf War began, the vote in the Senate in 1991 to authorize the use of force was 52 to 47. But once the war started, there was unity. I think it's very important not to confuse a consensus that something should be done with the need for such kind of lockstep that if we hear disagreements or dissent, we think that the country's weak. It just doesn't work that way.
Is there going to be, in your opinion, is there going to be some serious dissension if, in fact, over the next few weeks and months, the U.S. is engaged in a serious, massive war?
Well, the first question is, of course, how well will things go? One of the reasons there was virtually no dissent once the Gulf War began was that it ran into no obstacles. The bombing of Baghdad followed by a 100-hour ground war with virtually no American casualties, some, but far fewer than we thought. There was no room for dissent. This, as we've all been told, is going to be a much more difficult operation, stretching out, we've just heard on your broadcast, over months, if not years. The likelihood of casualties are high, and Lord knows we've seen just behind me the prospect of casualties at home, which we've never experienced as high. And the question at that point is whether or not if there are disagreements, if there are people who raise questions about how the war is conducted, it's going to be misinterpreted as a kind of broader discontent. I don't believe the country is going to be torn by dissension over the conduct of military operations. But when objections are heard to specific steps, I think we, taking some heart from our history, should understand it is actually part of the American tradition.
Jeff Greenfield in New York, thank you very much as usual. Back to you, Joey.
Where the World Trade Center complex once stood, the massive rescue effort pushes on even at this hour. At last count, 152 bodies have been recovered from the site, and nearly 5,000 people are still listed as missing. So the workers continue to toil over an estimated 1.25 million tons of skyscraper debris. Joining us from very near the rescue site is CNN's Martin Savage. Tell us on the latest on the operations there. Marty.
Joy, it was another all-out day today by rescuers and searchers. It will be another all-out night. And it was another day when no survivors were pulled from the rubble. It is a problem here at this particular site, a problem that they would like to correct, seeing someone coming alive here. In addition to searching for survivors, the emergency officials are now telling their crews to be on the lookout for something else. Signs of stress, signs of strain, even the possibility of emotional breakdowns. Medical crews that have been out in the area say that emotional strain has been one of the most common maladies that they have been treating firefighters, police officers, and other rescuers today. Some of the New York City firefighters have not left this building, or what used to be the Twin Towers here, this site, since Tuesday, saying that there are simply too many of their own yet to be found. I talked to one firefighter who comes from Mechanicstown in New York, Tim Fazio, and he spoke about the very issue of morale.
Well, we still have a lot of brothers down there that, that are, hopefully we'll find them, but, and thinking of other victims. They're trying to keep an upbeat, but it's kind of hard too. But morale's trying to be up, trying to keep up there.
It was also a time today when hundreds of people gathered on corners here to await their turn to return to their apartments they had to flee on that day of terror last Tuesday. They all had to be escorted into the area where their now vacant apartments are, and they were given 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, to collect their things, Joey.
CNN's Martin Savage near Ground Zero. We want to move ahead now in New York City at this hour. Mayor Rudy Giuliani speaking about the rescue effort. Let's listen.
Feehan, for Pete Gansey, and for Father Judge, and unfortunately, it probably is an indication of what we're going to have to face in the future. But to each of their families, we give our support, love, and condolences, and look upon this as 3 people who have lost their lives as casualties of war. They're heroes. They're like the heroes that we had at Pearl Harbor. Each one of them was trying to save lives. Pete Gansey evacuated his men, sent them north out of danger. He turned around, walked back south into danger in order to get more men out, and was killed. Bill Feehan was directing the operation and wouldn't leave. And Father Judge was administering the last rites to someone at the time that he died. Those are wartime casualties by anybody's description, and they are they're 3 heroes, and there are many, many others. We're very happy that we've been able to get the command center up this quickly, because I think it has, first of all, has a tremendous amount of practical value. It allows us to coordinate things, the city, the state, the federal government, much more effectively. It has a lot of symbolic value also. The command center was destroyed by these cowards that attacked us. The command center was destroyed on Tuesday. We've been operating out of the police academy up until now, and we put together quickly a command center, but the command center has been rebuilt by Saturday and open and functioning. It's even bigger than the command center we had before, has more facilities, and I congratulate everybody who put this together, all of the people that worked on it, from the Office of Emergency Management, from OEM, and from the Economic Development Corporation that controlled this site, that had to work on it, and DCAS, and all of the people that have gotten this done. This is a miracle to have gotten this done as quickly as they did, and it's a great example of the fact that we can come back real quick and even better and stronger than we were before. We're very hopeful that we're going to continue to clean up the area and get things as back to normal as possible by Monday. The subway tests that we did today all seem to work, so there's no reason why they won't work tomorrow and the next day, and we can get more things open. The stock exchange will be open. The mercantile exchange will be open. We're going to have a additional ferry service on 58th Street and First Avenue in Brooklyn to the Whitehall ferry terminal. So there'll be a ferry from Brooklyn to Manhattan. There hasn't been a ferry from Brooklyn to Manhattan in a long, long time. At some point after the Brooklyn Bridge was built, I think they did away with the ferry from Brooklyn to Manhattan. But now there'll be a ferry from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and it'll bring a lot of people to Wall Street. It'll start at 6 a.m. on Monday morning, go to 9 a.m., and then operate between 3:30 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. at night. So it'll be another means of transportation. The medical examiner is here, and we're going to ask Dr. Hirsch to explain the DNA announcement that we're making in order to alert people to what they have to bring. They have to bring with them, and to explain some of the process that we'll be going through in the next couple weeks, if not months. The economic development efforts seem to be working really well. It's a joint state and city effort. We're contacting lots of businesses, and so far the responses have been very positive with regard to people wanting to stay, wanting to find new sites, wanting to continue to invest in the city. And with the number of people in the city of New York, it appears as if the city may be even more popular now than it used to be in the past as a place to come. So the support and the willingness of people to invest in the city and people to come to the city of New York may have actually increased as a result of this. Maybe that's a way of showing support for the city of New York now that it's been attacked in the way that it has. But we're very grateful for that. And we're also very grateful for the President's visit. I think that's done an awful lot to demonstrate that kind of support. We've taken out 22,008 tons of debris so far, 2,047 truckloads, and there have been 84, as of at least this count about 3 o'clock this afternoon, 84 bodies that have been recovered.
Those are identified. 60 others on.
I'm sorry, 84 bodies that have been identified, 60 more that have been recovered, and the total dead on arrival right now is 159, according to the police department's count. And of those, 24 are firefighters, 2 civilian EMTs, 2 Port Authority police officers, 1 New Jersey firefighter. And our hearts go out to all of them, because in each one of those cases we're going to have situations like we had today. And tomorrow the fire commissioner is going to announce promotions, so we'll have him describe that in a few minutes. Governor?
Thank you.
Mayor, thank you. This is a sad day, and there will be other sad days as well. And the prayers of all New Yorkers, and I believe all Americans, are with the families who went through the difficult process of saying final goodbyes to the true heroes who have done so much to lead and inspire the fire department over the course of the past decades. I wanted to comment as well on President Bush's visit to New York yesterday. It was exactly what I believe New York needed. That visit was uplifting and raised the morale of the hundreds and thousands of heroes who are down there working on the site right now. It raised the spirits, I believe, of all New Yorkers. And as we go through the suffering, one of the things the President did, along with the Mayor, yesterday, was to spend not a half hour as he was scheduled to, but closer to 3 hours with the families of some of those whose loved ones have passed on or are missing. And he shared tears with them and hugs with them and prayers with them. And I think that was enormously helpful to those families as they go through this tremendous grief. And the mayor and I were honored to have been with the president while he showed this type of human side to his leadership during this very real crisis. The state deployment, we're continuing to do everything we can to back up the tremendous effort that the city is making. We now have 4,500 National Guard troops activated here in the city. We're rotating on an ongoing basis 500 state police, and we have 22 different state agencies working here to help with the relief effort and recovery process. Which brings me to the question of volunteers. And I was at the Javits Center earlier today, and we are just enormously grateful and proud to the literally tens of thousands of people from across America who have come here to help out. I met people from South Texas. I met a person from Montenegro who had come here in an effort to help out. It's just incredible, the outpouring of support. And but what we're telling people is that control of the site is essential, that having people volunteer and go down to the site right now is not necessary. While we're very grateful for their willingness to help and their commitment to be a part of the relief effort, there are other better ways people can do it. And they should look to help. And some of the ways to do it are back home where they're from, to join their ambulance corps. We've been deploying those throughout the time. Join their fire department. Help the Salvation Army and Red Cross go through their relief efforts. Donate blood. These are all things that people out there who want to help can do right in their home communities that could be of enormous help as we go forward. And I wouldn't mind suggesting as well that people who are that committed and interested could sign up and join the National Guard. Because it's not just in times of war and military action that the National Guard is so helpful. It's ice storms and blizzards and fires and, of course, tragic attacks like this. So there's so much people can do without having to come to the site, and that's what we would encourage them to do as we go forward. I also want to, again, people have been donating, and our World Trade Center Relief Fund, along with the city's Twin Towers Fund and the United Way's September 11th Fund, have been just incredibly gratified by the outpouring of support, and the donations can be made to the World Trade Center Relief Fund through a website, www.state.my.us, and that will coordinate, we will coordinate with the Twin Towers Fund and the other relief funds as well. And finally, the Business Assistance Program was enormously successful. Yesterday we had close to 300 entities, from individual proprietorships to large corporations, coming in looking for help, and we will continue to offer that joint assistance, city, state, federal, to businesses looking for that type of assistance. And the number, in addition to the city's operation down on Pine Street with our joint operation on 3rd Avenue, is that businesses looking for this help can call as 1-800-I-LOVE-NY. And we would encourage people to feel comfortable calling that number, and we'll do everything we can to help. So again, Mayor, thank you for your leadership. We thank the President for the incredible support that he and the federal government have shown, and we're going to get through this. Thank you.
Tomorrow we're going to promote about 160 firefighters, lieutenants, captains, battalion chiefs, deputy chiefs, and assistant chiefs to assist us in this rescue effort and in the training that's necessary for so many new people that will be in our squad units, our rescue units. And in addition to those people that we need to run those units, we need to continue training and hazardous materials and everything else, just to be prepared for anything that might happen in this city. So the fire department has been severely wounded. We've lost at least missing many of our top leaders, our top commanders, and we have to prepare. Even hopefully, if we find some, certainly going to be very, very seriously injured, and we have to go on, and we'll begin that tomorrow morning. Excuse me? We'll do it outside of Fire Department headquarters tomorrow morning at noon.
Replace Chief Yancey and
Yes, Chief Nigro is going to assume Chief of Department, and Chief Cassano is going to be Chief of Operations.
the second person was,
Chief Salvatore Cassano, C-A-S-S-A-N-O.
and is Dan Negro?
Nigro, N-I-G-R-O. I'm sorry.
Daniel.
Richard.
As the mayor said, getting the Emergency Operations Center back in almost less than 48 hours was a terrific effort by a lot of people. I want to thank Henry Jackson from my staff, who served as my project manager. I want to thank Verizon, who really did a yeoman's job getting us telephone service, and all the agencies that are in here that helped get us back up, so we can work effectively, keep information flowing, and keep everyone informed.
I have to do one thing, though, in exchange for Richie working for 48 hours, getting this done. Paul Shearer is 13 years old today, so his dad owes him a birthday present, which may be interesting since his Little League nickname is Hollywood, and he thinks he's 30, not 13. So I'm going to wish Paul a happy birthday. And if you wish him a happy birthday too,
All right, to our viewers who've been watching this, you have been watching a bit of an update coming to us from the city leaders and state leaders of New York. Mayor Giuliani leading the way with Governor Pataki as well. The mayor remembering those have been lost. Of course, there were funerals for 3 key figures in the fire department today as well. He was talking about how the city moves forward from this point. He noted that 84 people have been identified now from the World Trade Center site. 60 more people have been recovered, but the number of missing at the World Trade Center site is still in the neighborhood of 5,000 individuals, and so the work goes on there. Moving on now to consider, to date, New York hospitals have treated more than 3,700 injuries related to the Twin Towers attacks. Aside from rescue workers who were hurt on the job, the number of victims at local hospitals has dropped off now. Joining us from St. Vincent's, which is one of the key hospitals involved in the emergency work, is CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who is with our medical unit. Dr. Gupta, what are you seeing there?
Well, I'm here at St. Vincent's, just like you say, Joey, and we haven't seen as many patients as we've seen posters and crowds of people looking at the missing wall, trying to find a friend, a neighbor, a relative, somebody. We've seen vigils being held all around the hospital, things like that, people walking up with posters, signs, things like that to try and recruit any help to try and find their loved ones. We haven't seen as many patients, maybe 5 or so over the entire day today. There's about 35 patients in the hospital right now. As you say, over 500 have been treated at St. Vincent's over the last 4 days.
Sanjay, can you talk to us a little bit about what the expectations are now? I mean, indeed, from the beginning of this, there had been the expectation that all the hospitals would be flooded, that there would be a great demand for the medical experts to be able to come in, and yet it doesn't seem that they have had as many to treat as they might have anticipated. What are the expectations now for what might lie ahead?
Well, it's really quite amazing. I actually spoke to one of the ER doctors just recently, and the doctors do remain somewhat optimistic. They kind of went over with me a little bit of what it takes to actually try and retrieve bodies from the rubble. And I think we have a graphic that actually talks a little bit about that. But it's a really sort of intricate, amazing process. It starts with sort of assessing the structure around the buildings, then certainly doing what's called surface removal, removing bodies that are obviously found at the surface. And then you've heard so much about voids. These are air pockets, Joey, that could be anywhere within the rubble, and there could even be sub-basements that actually have air within them. Then after that, there's actually a tunneling and trenching process that goes on to try and get to the bodies without actually removing all of the rubble as of yet. Removing the rubble, the final procedure, the rescue and recovery procedure, is a very dangerous procedure, and that's why they go through these other 4 steps first to try and make sure they can get any bodies they can ahead of time. When they actually remove all the rubble after that, and we're seeing different stages of this as we look at Ground Zero, that's when they actually find the rest of the bodies, Joey.
But Sanjay, we're talking about an event that took place on Tuesday morning. It is now into Saturday evening. Is the expectation from the medical experts that this is still survivable at this point?
There is a degree of optimism that I'm still sensing, Joey. Talking to the doctors here at St. Vincent's, talking to the doctors here in New York, some of whom are my friends, there are some limiting steps, though. There certainly are some obstacles that they're concerned about. I think we can have a graphic as well to talk about this. Certainly oxygen deprivation. If you're in a situation where you just don't have oxygen, that's going to be a greatly limiting step to survival. Dehydration. If you happen to be